More than water. I need coffee that I know when you're fasting.
I can drink coffee.
Jazakallah khair. My wife, she packed me, She knows. Well, bless her. She made it sweet, mashallah. Yeah, you drink black coffee, but today she put a little vanilla in it. So نبدأ بإذن الله تعالى. We begin inshallah. Yeah. بارك الله فيكم. طيب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه كما يحب ربنا ويرضاه وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا مزيدا وبعد فنواصل الليلة بدراستنا تراجم السلف. We continue tonight with the study of some of the short biographies of our Salaf, beginning with the A'immatu Kutub As-Sitta, beginning again, like we mentioned, with the 6 Imams of the 6 known or mashhur and famous books of Hadith. Last class we talked about Imam al-Nasa'i rahimahullah. Who can tell me his name? Imam al-Nasa'i. Khurasani. Nisbatuhu. That's where he's from. What's his name? Like his name and his dad's name, like Fulan ibn Fulan. Does anybody remember? Nobody wrote it down? Let's write it down, guys, yeah? I brought paper, yeah? Look, guys, yeah. For me, I seem like I'm not, but I'm actually a very strict teacher. I don't like people sitting in my class if they don't have pens and paper. So I bought a gift. I have lots of paper. The pen part, unfortunately, you're going to have to ask Muhammad. Yeah? Inshallah. You can hand it out. Or you can use your phones. And your tablets are good. That's okay too. So his name is Ahmad ibn Shu'aib ibn Ali. Right? Ahmad ibn Shu'aib ibn Ali. And his kunya was Abu Abdullah. Like the brother mentioned, he's a Nasa'i in the village or city of Nasa, which doesn't really exist today in the modern day today, right? Barakallahu fikum, jazakallahu khair. That's from Khurasan. Brother has pens, mashallah, tabarakallah. طيب, should I ask more questions? فاعتبروا يا أولي الألباب. أيوة. قرب? Oh, okay, sorry, my bad. No problem, inshallah. Is that better? Let me know, inshallah. Yeah?
Ladies upstairs.
Yeah, okay, let me know, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum. I apologize. So we should ask one more question then. Who are the 2 main students that we talked about of Imam al-Nasa'i? We mentioned 2 main students of Imam al-Nasa'i, Abu Abdullah Ahmad bin Shu'aib ibn Ali al-Khurasani al-Nasa'i. Come on, my brothers. Or sisters, maybe closer? Really? No, I can manage, inshallah. Let's hide my hands behind the table. Aywa, the 2 main students of Imam al-Nasa'i. It's not a test, guys, yeah? So you can look at your notes if you have them. One of them, I'll give you a hint, one of them wrote a very famous book in Aqidah. He was Shafi'i thumma tahannaf. He became Hanafi after. Which is fine, no problem, inshallah. He's very famous. He wrote one of the most quintessential books of Aqidah. Fundamental books of Aqidah. He also wrote Al-Mishkat or Mushkil al-Athar. That one, the Imam Al-Azim Abadi rahimahullah from the subcontinent scholars of India. He wrote his famous Sharh explanation Mishkat. Come on. You were absent, huh? No excuses, brother. You can watch the recording, huh? May Allah bless you. طيب, okay. So his main students were many, طبعا, but we picked out these two because their names, one name is important because he was his main student, and another name was important because being a senior student also was famous himself, became a great imam himself. That imam is Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi rahimahullah. Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi famously wrote Mushkil al-Athar, which was a book in Ilal al-Hadith, and he wrote, of course, Al-Aqidah al-Tahawiyya, right? Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi al-Hanafi rahimahullah. And then the other student was Abu Ali al-Naysaburi. Abu Ali al-Naysaburi. He's important because he speaks about his shaykh a lot more. When you read about Imam al-Nasa'i, what he did, where he went, who he sat with, things like this, Abu Ali al-Naysaburi was the one who narrates, and he narrated from him his hadith. طيب. Last question. How are the sisters can hear?
I think they haven't complained yet.
They haven't complained. That means good. No news is good news. Huh?
Yeah.
طيب. Okay, let's keep it simple. When did Imam al-Nasa'i rahmatullahi alayhi rahmatan wasi'a pass away? His date of death, or his tarikh al-wafat, his date of his demise, or when did he decease, or? No. We're talking about 4th century. He's the last of the Imatu Sitta. He's the last of the 6 Imams of Hadith to die. So it's not in the 200s. 300 what? No, not 350. That's way too late. We could start at 300. No. 301. No. 302. No. لا, it's in the 300s, brother. لا ليش قفزت يا شيخ من 302. لا تحب الثلاثة, huh? He died in the year 303. He died in the year what? 303 Hijri. Rahimahullah ta'ala rahmatan wasi'a. He died, I believe, in Baghdad. No, he died in Palestine. That should have been my 4th question. He died in Ramla, and he's buried today in Bayt al-Maqdis in Jerusalem. He's buried in Jerusalem, in Palestine. حرسها الله وحفظ الله أهلها. May Allah Azza wa Jal emancipate that land and return it to the Muslims and protect its people. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. طيب. خلاص, no more questions. Don't worry, you guys can relax, yeah? But take notes, my brothers, yeah? Please, and barakallahu feekum. طيب, اليوم, today, inshallah, or Layla, tonight, we're going to talk about Imam al-Hafidh Abu Isa al-Tirmidhi. Al-Hafidh Abu Isa al-Tirmidhi, rahimahullah ta'ala. فنبدأ وأقول مستعينا بالله. I say and begin seeking the help and aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His name was Muhammad ibn Isa. His name was Muhammad ibn Isa ibn Sawrah. Muhammad ibn Isa ibn Sawrah. And his kunya was Abu Isa. It's common practice of the Arabs in the Muslim lands generally, طبعا, that you name your son after your father. Especially if the اختلف الأحزاب, right? If the parties are not agreeing to what to name the son, then it was a common practice. Abu Isa. So it's easy to remember. He's Abu Isa, Muhammad ibn Isa. And we have an example of that in the family of the Prophet ﷺ. Abdullah bin Abbas named his first son Abbas after his father. So Abdullah bin Abbas, his kunya was Abu al-Abbas. So Abu al-Abbas, Abdullah bin Abbas, right? So we have Abu Isa Muhammad ibn Isa ibn Sawrah. Okay? Ibn Musa ibn al-Dahhak, which you don't need to know. At-Tirmidhi. Tayyib. He was born in the year 209. Born in the year 209. In a city or a village called Tirmidh. Some scholars say Tarmidh, some scholars say Turmudh. All of it is what? Acceptable, but the mashhoor, that which is mutadawil, which is mass transmitted or more transmitted, is bikasrat Tirmidh. This place Tirmidh is today what we would call in the country of Uzbekistan. In the country of Uzbekistan, Central Asia again. Again, we have a scholar from where? Central Asia. I told you this place produced a plethora of scholars. Imam An-Nasa'i, who we discussed last class, also was from where? Central Asia. It was Khurasani, right? Khurasan is in Central Asia. We said today would be Uzbekistan, where Imam An-Nasa'i was from. Okay. He was born in Tirmidh, which is modern day Uzbekistan. His asl, meaning his ethnicity, was from a place called Maru. Maru is in modern day Turkmenistan. Modern day Turkmenistan. That's where Imam At-Tirmidhi, his asl or his ethnic origins were from there. Some scholars add the nisbah, At-Tirmidhi. After that they say As-Sulami. As-Sulami, which gives some indication that his ethnic background, maybe further back up, was from the Arab, like from the Hijaz or from northern Hijazi area. But in terms of his immediate ethnicity, his language that he spoke Farsi, right? And he spoke the native language of Khurasan at that time, which was Farsi, but they had their own, their native language as well. Tayyib. So he was born there in Tirmidh, and he was raised there in Tirmidh as well. Spent his early years of his life in Central Asia in Tirmidh, in modern day Uzbekistan. Imam At-Tirmidhi rahmatullahi alayhi traveled for talab al-ilm, and he famously left his home very young as well, 15, 16, rahimahullah, and he traveled within Khurasan. So he traveled within Khurasan, so within Central Asia, and that's a lot of places, right? We don't have time to mention. Okay, but in those travels, he met Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah, and other scholars, and he learned from them. Actually, Imam al-Bukhari, being older than him, but he narrates two hadith. He narrates from his student, Imam al-Tirmidhi, two hadith. But Imam al-Tirmidhi, he travels to Khurasan or within Khurasan, and then he travels to Iraq. He leaves Central Asia and goes towards Sham. He passes Sham, goes to Iraq. Then he goes to Mecca and Medina, the Hijaz. Right? Yarhamukallah. His main teachers, again, there's many, but we cannot mention all of them. We'll begin with Qutaybah ibn Sa'id. Qutaybah ibn Sa'id, from the Imams and teachers of Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah. So Imam al-Tirmidhi also studied with Imam al-Bukhari and the shuyukh of Imam al-Bukhari. So you'll hear this name often, my brothers. Yeah, so you should know who these people are. You probably heard of him already. Qutaybah ibn Sa'id. If you've opened up Sahih Bukhari recently, then you'll see his name there. Qutaybah ibn Sa'id. And then we have again Ishaq ibn Rahuya. We said, right? The pronunciation of his name is Rahuya, although it's spelled Rahuwe, but it's not pronounced that way because it's a Farsi name. It's not an Arabic name. Taban, from his teachers, we already mentioned Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, Imam al-Bukhari, how you guys, we all know him, inshallah ta'ala. And from his shuyukh was a man by the name of Amr ibn Ali al-Fallas, extremely important individual from the Muhaddithin, Kibar, A'immatul Hadith, very important person. His name will come up often in these classes. When I say that person's name will come up often, that means that's an indication, ishara, latifa min indi, for me that you should know, write his name down, bidhani ta'ala, if you're taking notes. Amru, not Umar, Amr. Yes, Ayn, Mim, Ra, Wow. بفتح العين. عمرو ibn Ali al-Fallas. طيب. From the students of Imam al-Tirmidhi, these names are a bit more obscure because we're talking now middle of the 4th century. Most of them late 3rd, early and middle of 4th century. We won't study their names, but to give you an idea, if you ever get interested in start reading about some of the Imams of Hadith, Abu Bakr Ahmad ibn Ismail al-Samarqandi, okay, very important Imam of Hadith. Abu Hamid Ahmad al-Marwazi, and his brother was Dawood Abdullah al-Marwazi. So those two brothers as well. We have Al-Husayn ibn Yusuf al-Farbari والربيع ibn Hayyan al-Bahili. Now there's more names, like I said, we cut them down. Imam al-Dhahabi, both of these lists from Sir Alam Nubula of Imam al-Dhahabi, more than about 60 names. And then he said after them, وَخَلْقٌ كَثِير, and a great amount of others. So he mentions about 60 or 50 something names for his shuyukh, and then he says وَخَلْقٌ كَثِير, and a great many others. And then he mentions about 35 or 40 something names for his students, and then he says وَخَلْقٌ كَثِير, and then a great many others. Imam al-Tirmidhi rahmatullahi alayhi from his youth was known to have an extremely strong memorization, hifz, qawi jiddan. He narrates himself, as Imam al-Dhahabi narrates from him with his chain of narration, that Imam al-Tirmidhi, he said, كنت في طريق مكة, I was once on the way to Mecca. فكتبت جزئين من حديث شيخ, so I wrote from memory 2 volumes of hadith from a sheikh that he narrated from. And please understand, when he says 2 volumes, these are terminologies that have meanings that don't correlate with modern terminologies and their meanings. A juz, this is a juz. 1 juz of the Quran is a juz, 22 pages, right? Back, front and back. Ahlul Hadith, when they say juz, they mean a scroll. In modern day times, you think you're looking about somewhere between 600 to 800 pages. 1 scroll was about 2 of these. Okay? 1 scroll or 1 juz would be about 2 of these. So he wrote 2 of these, filled it with hadith, that from one sheikh they narrated from his memory. فَوَجَدْتُهُ, so on the way to Mecca I found him. I bumped into him. فَسَأَلْتُهُ وَأَنَا أَظُنُّ أَنَّ الْجُزْئَيْنَ مَعِي. So I asked the sheikh that I was writing his hadith, I had memorized his hadith from him. I wrote them out, and then I bumped into him on the way to Mecca. Right? And I thought, I'm with I have these 2 ajza with me. I wrote it out. Let me ask him about them. فَسَأَلْتُهُ فَأَجَابَنِي. So I asked him questions, he gave me answers. فإذا معي جزءان بياض. And so I had two more parchments to write in that were clean, fresh, ready to write, but they were empty completely. فبقي يقرأ علي من لفظه فنظر فرأى في يدي ورقا بياضا. So then the Shaykh started narrating to me his hadith more. He narrated and narrated, and he kept looking at me and narrating and looking at me, and then he saw me sitting there with my books with the pages blank. فقال أما تستحي مني. He's like, do you not have any shame in front of me? The Shaykh, he got upset with Imam Abu Isa Tirmidhi. He said, what, you don't have haya? You don't have haya in front of me? You don't have shame in front of me? Like, because he's like, why aren't you writing? I've been narrating to you all these hadith, you're not writing anything down. فأعلمته بأمري وقلت أحفظه كله. So he said, so I told him about my ability, and I said, I've memorized everything you've said already. فقال اقرأ فقرأت عليه. So he said to me, alright, go ahead, read it then. Read back to me what I've been saying. Imagine the Shaykh is reading from his book though. The Shaykh is not reciting his hadith to him from his memory. The Shaykh is reading to him from his Kitab al-Hadith. So Imam al-Tirmidhi said, so I recited all of it to him. فَلَمْ يُصَدِّقْني. So the Shaykh, he said, I don't believe you. وَقَالَ أَسْتَحْضَرْتَ قَبْلَ أَن تَجِي. He's like, did you review these hadith before you came to me? You know them before, right? You were revising these hadith. So then Imam al-Tirmidhi, he said, حَدِّثْنِي بِغَيْرِهِ. He said, alright, narrate to me some other hadith other than these ones. قال فحدثني بأربعين حديثا. So he narrated to me 40 hadith with their chains of narration. So that's 40 different separate hadith with 40 different chains of narrations, right? So between Imam al-Tirmidhi and his Shaykh and the Prophet ﷺ, there will be on average about 5 or 6 people. Correct? So he has now 40, that's 90 names that he has to memorize with the Sahabiyat, 40 different Sahaba, and then the different hadith. ثم قال هات. So then the Shaykh said, alright, give me back these 40 hadith. فأعدتها عليه ما أخطأت في حرف. And so I repeated back in order all 40 hadith with all 40 chains of narrations, and I did not make a mistake in even one letter. Right? So this is an example of Imam al-Tirmidhi rahmatullahi alayhi. There are many other examples, but again, we don't have the time, of the quwwat al-hifz, the strength of the hifz of Imam Abu Isa al-Tirmidhi. طيب. Time restriction. لا بأس. Abu Isa al-Tirmidhi rahmatullahi alayhi wrote many books. He wrote what? Many books. He is known though. He is known and he is famous for 3. And al-awam, for the awam, like the general laity of the Muslims. He's known for for example, his sunan collection, what we have maybe even in this masjid, Allah alam, his sunan at-Tirmidhi, where he collected his fiqh positions on the different issues of fiqh, and he brought the daleel for his positions from the hadith, and he ordered them in the order of the books of fiqh. Right? This is the one that is the most commonly read, studied. I brought with myself here Jami' al-Tirmidhi. This is the most famous sharh of Al-Imam Al-Allama Al-Hafiz Muhammad Abdul Rahman ibn Abdul Rahim Al-Mubarak Furi, rahimahullah, who died in the year 1353 Hijri. And it is in about, I believe, 9 or 11 volumes. Okay? So this book, if you open it up, you will find chapters of fiqh and then Imam al-Tirmidhi's position. And Imam al-Tirmidhi wrote this book. He was famous for it because he did something that he was very unique in. Not a lot of scholars were doing at that time. which was, now in his book of hadith, he would mention the fuqaha. He would mention the scholars of fiqh and their positions, whether they agreed with him or not, and why his position was stronger. Right? This is not, Imam Bukhari didn't do this. Right? He hid, the mastery of Imam Bukhari was that his fiqh was in his chapter headings of his book. But you can only understand his fiqh with deep study of his Sahih. Imam al-Tirmidhi made it easy, accessible. That's why you have, for example, the great scholar and who is known as Shaykh al-Islam, Ismail al-Harawi rahimahullah. Okay? He said, Jami' al-Tirmidhi anfa' min kitab al-Bukhari wa Muslim. He said, Imam Ismail al-Harawi rahimahullah, the great imams of hadith, okay, of about the 5th or 6th century, he said, the Sunan of Imam al-Tirmidhi is more beneficial. He didn't say it's more correct, but he said it's more beneficial than the Sahih of Imam Muslim and the Sahih of Imam Bukhari. What was his justification for that statement? He said, لأنهما لا يقف على الفائدة منهما إلا المتبحر العالم والمتبحر العالم. He said, because the Sahih of Imam Bukhari and the Sahih of Imam Muslim, no one benefits from those two books except the one who is a student of knowledge, scholar. You have to sit, you have to study. Imam al-Bukhari, you have to study his chapter headings. You have to study the hadith, his repeated hadith, why he repeats the hadith. It's a long process to understand the fiqh of Imam Bukhari. It's there. Imam Muslim has no basically chapter headings in his. You have to infer from the subject of the hadith. It's there. The fiqh of Imam Muslim is there, but it requires study. He said, وَالْجَامِعُ يَصِلُ إِلَى فَائِدَتِهِ كُلُّ أَحَدٍ. He said, but the Jami' of Imam al-Tirmidhi, also known as Sunan of Imam al-Tirmidhi, is the benefits of it are accessible to everyone. Imam al-Tirmidhi made the benefits of the book accessible to everyone. طيب, Imam Abu Isa al-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala rahmatan wasi'ah, he dies in the year 279 Hijri, at the age of around 70, 71 تقريبا. He dies in the year 279 Hijri. He dies blind. Rahmatullahi alayhi. And Imam al-Mubarak Furi here, he mentions a fa'idah. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, قلت, I say, meaning Imam Abdurrahman Mubarak Furi, rahimahullah ta'ala, rahmatan wasi'ah, Muhammad Abdurrahman Mubarak Furi, he says, ويرده أيضا ما قال العلامة الشاه عبد العزيز في البستان. He says, the great scholar Shah Abdul Aziz, he mentions, and it's in Farsi, he says, تورع وزهد بحدا دشت كهفوك أن متصور نسيت بخوف إلهي بسيارة قري وزاري كردونا بناشد. Which means, he, rahimahullah ta'ala, meaning Imam al-Tirmidhi, he was somebody who wept excessively. This is a quality of Imam al-Tirmidhi. People used to write poetry about his crying, as you see here in Farsi. He cried and he wept from the fear of his Lord until he cried and he lost his sight. And so he was somebody known, rahimahullah ta'ala, for kathrat al-buka, for excessive crying out of the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this increased as he became older. And it happened so that as he was praying at night, and he was weeping, that he wept so much that he actually lost his sight, rahimahullah ta'ala, rahmatan wasi'ah. Naam. Yeah. So Imam Abu Isa at-Tirmidhi, he puts chapter headings similar to his contemporaries like Abu Dawood, who we'll learn about. Imam Muslim, no. Imam Muslim's book, just like Imam Bukhari, who I'm telling you guys, I'm warning you right now. It's a warning, but it's a nice warning, inshallah. It's nothing scary. We're probably going to have to spend about 2 days on each of them. Okay, is this impossible to do 40 minutes, half an hour even? It's impossible. It's not impossible, but it's going to do a disservice. Even this I feel like is a disservice, but we're just trying to move it along. Imam Muslim and Imam Bukhari require 2 days. So you just be patient with me, inshallah ta'ala, yes? But we will learn about their Jawami', their 2 collections that we call Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari. They were both Musnad books. Okay? Imam Muslim, Musnad means he gathered hadith and ordered them according to the narrator of the hadith. That's it. Okay? Imam al-Bukhari's his book was also Musnad, but it was Musannaf, meaning he had a purpose to it outside of hadith. But he doesn't explicitly mention them. He just mentions the chapter heading. Like for example, you say Bab Mashal al-Khuffayn, right? The chapter of wiping over socks. He mentions about 6 or 7 hadith there. So from the chapter heading you understand that he believes it's permissible and that it's sunnah to wipe over your socks if you wear them in a state of tahara. Correct? And then the details of the socks, does it have to be leather? Can it be made out of other than leather? You find them in the hadith of that chapter. Do you understand? Yeah. طيب. Let's read about some of what the scholars said about Imam al-Tirmidhi rahimahullah. Imam al-Hakim rahimahullah, he says about Imam al-Tirmidhi, سمعت عمر بن علك, who is a great scholar of hadith, he says, I heard Umar bin Alak say, مات البخاري فلم يخلف بخراسان مثل أبي عيسى. He said, this man, Umar bin Alak, right, who is from the great Imams of hadith, Al-Hakim narrates, he says that Umar bin Alak, he said, Imam Bukhari died. Imam Bukhari dies in his hometown, in the outskirts of his hometown in Bukhara. He's buried in Bukhara. Today, like I said, Uzbekistan. He says that Imam Bukhari died and was buried there, and he left nobody in Khurasan who could equal to Imam Abu Isa Tirmidhi. Nobody. Right? Fil ilmi wal hifz, in his knowledge, in his memorization, wal wara'i wal zuhud, in his forbearance, in his humility, in his asceticism, meaning his relinquishing of the dunya. Baka hatta ami, he cried until he became blind. وبقي ضريرا سنين, and he remained blind for many years before he died. Rahimahullah ta'ala, rahmatullah. And I'm focusing on one thing about an imam at a time. Imam al-Tirmidhi, I want us to focus on this aspect. Kathirul buka. This is from the prophetic qualities. Right? We see this quality reflected in the best of the Sahaba, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And we see this quality amongst the people who were close to Allah, the people who read the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam the most, that they were often people who cried like vigorously, plentifully, right? Aisha radiallahu anha, she narrates famously that the Messenger of Allah alayhi salam would cry at night, حتى بلت لحيته, until his whole beard became drenched in his own tears. And in narration, she said that one time I looked at his feet his feet were swollen, and the dirt around his feet became wet. So his beard is dripping from his tears and falling to the floor and making the floor wet. Famously, when the Prophet ﷺ was in the last moments of his life, he told his wife Aisha, Muru abaki yusalli bin nas. He said to her, tell your father to pray and lead the people in prayer. What did Aisha radiallahu anha say about her father? She said, Ya Rasulullah, Abi rajulun bakka. Ya Rasulullah, my father, he's a man, he cries profusely. Let's bring someone else. He said, Muru abaki, or Muri abaki, yusalli bin nas. And he had to say it 3 times to her, which shows us how much the Prophet loved Abu Bakr, and that it's an ishara, it's an indication from the Prophet that Abu Bakr would be the leader of the Muslims after his death. طيب, Imam As-Sam'ani rahimahullah, he says about Imam At-Tirmidhi, أحد أئمة الذين يقتدى بهم في علم الحديث. He is one of the great Imams who is followed. His example is followed when it comes to the ilm of hadith. صنف كتاب الجامع والتواريخ والعلل. See, he wrote the book Al-Jami' Sunan that we know. He wrote books on tawarikh, which is books on history, names of narrators, and ilal, which is the slight hidden discrepancies of hadith. It's a very complicated book. Ilal al-Tirmidhi is you don't study this book as a student of hadith until you reach a certain level of understanding of hadith. It's a very complicated science of hadith, right? He wrote famously, again, I didn't even complete the list, subhanAllah. He famously wrote also Ash-Shama'il al-Muhammadiyya. Ash-Shama'il al-Muhammadiyya. Ala sahibiha afdalu as-salat wa taslim. This book was one of the quintessential books about the description of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Shama'il Muhammadiyya, meaning the description, the Muhammadi description, right? The sifat, the attributes of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he broke this book into 2 bits, into 2 parts. His physical attributes, and then his attributes in terms of his akhlaq and his mannerisms. He also wrote a book on adhkar. He wrote a book on adhkar, the adhkar of your day, like morning adhkar, evening adhkar, so on and so forth. He said about him, Imam As-Sam'ani said about him, رَجُلٌ عَالِمٌ مُتْقِنٌ. He was a scholar and he was grounded and precise. وَكَانَ يُضْرَبُ بِهِ الْمَثَلْ فِي الْحِفْظِ وَالضَّبْطِ. And he was a person he was an exemplary in his memorization and his precision in knowledge. And then look what he mentions about him. تَلْمِيذُ لِأَبِي عَبْدِ اللَّهِ Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari. He was the student, one of the main students of Imam Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari rahimahullah. وَشَارَكَ مَعَهُ فِي شُيُوخِهِ. And he also shared Imam Bukhari in some of Imam Bukhari's shuyukh. And that's common. Some of my shuyukh, Sheikh, for example, Sheikh Ubaid al-Jabiri rahimahullah, Sheikh Abdullah al-Bukhari hafidhahullah, I studied with some of their teachers. Sheikh Abdul Muhsin ibn Hamad al-Abbad. So even though Sheikh Ubaid is old enough to be my grandfather, and he is my Sheikh, Sheikh Rabi is old enough to be my great-grandfather, or he passed away a few years ago, rahimahullah, right? But I studied with his teacher. My teacher, Sheikh Abdullah al-Bukhari, who's still alive today, I studied with his teachers. This is a common thing. But it's a fadl, and it should not be ignored. I see the shuyukh of my Sheikh, I see their behavior in my Sheikh. And that's a blessing. And it's a blessing that we're chasing right now. Are we not? We're reading these things about these ai so that we can see the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba reflected in their characteristics. For example, Umar al-Khattab and Imam or Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu mentioned this weeping and crying. Weeping and crying. Asma bint Abi Bakr, same thing. She took it from her father. Right? Umar al-Khattab, one time, as Imam Ibn Abi Shaybah, he mentions in his Musannaf, the teacher of Imam Bukhari, in his book of Hadith, he mentions, with his chain of narration to Umar al-Khattab, right? He would recite and lead the people in Fajr. And one day, one of the Tabi'un came late to the Salah. And Umar al-Khattab, he thought, oh, I missed it. I'm going to miss Salat al-Fajr. But he caught it. And he found Umar al-Khattab repeating one ayah from Surah Yusuf. One ayah from Surah Yusuf again and again and again and again. And he wept and he wept and he wept and he wept until he couldn't go past that ayah, and he just made ruku' and completed the salah. And that ayah was where Allah Azza wa Jal, He mentions, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثْنِي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. I only complain about my sadness. I take my sadness and my trials and tribulations back to Allah. And Umar al-Khattab read this ayah again and again and wept to the point where he couldn't go past this ayah. And he just made ruku' and sujood. SubhanAllah. So we see this quality in the people who sat and they read and they devoted their lives to the Prophet ﷺ and to his Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'een. Taban, I had about like 8 different things I wanted to mention, but inshallah we'll suffice with that. May Allah Azza wa Jal accept it from all of us. هذا والله تعالى أعلى وأعلم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك والحمد لله رب العالمين. Do we have time for Q&A or